What's going on, everyone? And welcome to this week's episode of Righteous Rhetoric. I'm your host, Wes Lowry, and happy Holy Week. Holy Week is one of my favorite weeks in the year. It's the chance to reflect on and remember the power of Jesus' life in ministry, and especially on this Good Friday, to reflect on what Jesus did for us and how meaningful and important it is. Because on Good Friday, we remember that Jesus was betrayed and crucified. This event is an unimaginable suffering that Jesus went through, but it's also one that leads us into this depth of both hope and love. And so we're going to take some time today to remember the Friday that changed the world forever. A day marked by despair, but is also overshadowed by the promise and the hope of the resurrection. And so to fully appreciate Good Friday, we must first understand the magnitude of Jesus's sacrifice for us. You see, the Gospels recount that on this day, Jesus was betrayed by one of his own disciples, Judas, denied by another, Peter, and ultimately abandoned by nearly all of his followers. He faced false accusations, unjust trials, and physical, terrible torture, all while carrying the very weight of our sins upon his shoulders. As we were talking about what Jesus went through being betrayed and crucified with some of my students earlier in the week, I asked them to really consider, how do you feel if someone betrays you, someone you consider a friend, someone that you spent time with, someone that you trust even? And how would that betrayal impact you? How would it affect you? How would it make you feel? Betrayal hurts if you've ever experienced it before, because it's somebody that we trust that breaks the trust that we gave to them. But for me, it's really interesting to reflect on the fact that Jesus knew that he was going to be betrayed. And Jesus explains all this, that's to fulfill the scriptures. It goes to show that he is the Son of God, that he is the one that the Old Testament scriptures talk about. Yet, even though Jesus knew that he was going to be betrayed, he still broke bread with Judas. He still offered him the wine at the Last Supper. Even though Jesus knew he was going to be betrayed, by all accounts, as far as we know, he still treated Judas like the other disciples. He was friends with him. He taught him. He, as far as we know, wanted what was best for him. And yet Judas ultimately chooses 30 pieces of silver, deciding that his friendship with Jesus, deciding that after all the supernaturals that he has seen with the other disciples, is worth a measly 30 pieces of silver. And so let us sit with an uncomfortable truth on this Good Friday and acknowledge that we have also betrayed Jesus, because Jesus took a punishment that was meant for us. And so it's incredibly important to recognize the ways that we turn away from him, the times that we choose to betray him. Good Friday is a day that is meant for us to confront our own missteps. And in the sorrow of the cross, we acknowledge our sin and the separation that it causes from God. And so, as Jesus hung on the cross, he cries out in anguish, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That's Matthew 27:46. And these words resonate with many of us too, right? In moments of profound suffering in our own lives, we might feel the same sense of abandonment. And the silence can be deafening. It really can test our faith. But that is what's so powerful and unique about Jesus on the cross. We are the ones who betray him, we're the ones who put him there, yes, but Jesus also understands our pain and our suffering when we feel betrayed, when we feel lonely, when we cry out to God. Jesus understands that suffering and that discomfort, even though the suffering and discomfort he feels is because we put him there. When we cry out to God and we feel that sense of silence, it, as we said, can be deafening. But in the silence, there is also a profound truth. God is not absent. When Jesus cried out, God was not absent. He was present in the very suffering of Christ. And in the depths of despair, hope was being forged in that moment. And the redemptive plan was unfolding before the eyes of everyone. And from the darkness, a light would arise that changes everything. So as we observe Good Friday, let's sit in the silence with Jesus. Let's recognize that in our own moments of despair, even when there's silence, that God is still walking with us. He understands our pain. And in that understanding, he transforms that sorrow into strength. It's beautiful how God is consistently flipping things on its head. We look to sorrow and it transforms us into strength. And when we look at the cross, it's not just an instrument of torture, but for us, it's actually a sign of hope and salvation. That's why Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 1:18, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to those of us who are being saved, it is the power of God." You see, through the cross, we see the depth of God's love for humanity. It is here that we are reminded that while our sins are grave, that God's mercy for us is still greater. The cross represents the ultimate act of love, a love that embraces, a love that forgives, and a love that redeems. And so while Good Friday is a day of mourning, it is vital to remember that this is not the end of the story. The darkness of the day gives way to the glory of the resurrection. We know that the tomb that held Jesus would not be there when this narrative concludes. You see, this isn't the end of the story, it is the beginning of one. And it is one that gives us hope, encouragement, and one that inspires us. When we look at the fact that the cross represents the ultimate act of love, we said that it is a love that embraces, a love that forgives, and a love that redeems. Let's think about that for a second. As we sit here in the silence and recognize the power of our sin, the fact that it separates us from God, we celebrate that God's love for us is greater, that his mercy is greater than that God doesn't want to be separated from us. So when we embrace God's love, what does it look like for us to forgive, but also to live in a way that shows that we are redeemed? I was listening to a sermon earlier in the week and I really felt challenged by what this preacher said. He said, "Can someone look at you and know that you are living a life that is redeemed by God?" And I don't think there's any better day than to ponder that question than on Good Friday, where we look to the very act that Jesus did, dying on the cross for our sins, ultimately so he could be resurrected as we celebrate on Sunday. But that is where we are redeemed. And so the question is this: do we live like we are a redeemed people? And I think that's a question worth sitting with and contemplating as we give thanks to God for what happened on the cross. As we sit and reflect on the sin and the struggles in our lives that we currently have, but we are also reminded that that sin, that struggle, that loneliness that some of us deal with, regardless of what it looks like, it can be given to God and it can be redeemed. Because, as we noted earlier, that is the beauty of how God turns things on its head. The cross should not represent something good, right? It is a torturous, terrible way to die, but yet Christians wear it and celebrate it everywhere. Why? Because it is actually God redeeming us and celebrating us. So don't ever think that the sin, the struggle that you have in your life is beyond God's redemption. In fact, you might be stunned at how God turns that thing on its head and uses it for his glory and for your redemption. And that is the beauty of Good Friday. Even though today is a sad day, even though today is a day we reflect on the fact that the world killed the Son of God, we call it Good Friday. Why? Because we know that it redeemed us. We know the celebration and the resurrection that is coming in the next 3 days. We know that our God is a good God and that he loves us because of how he takes the tragedies of the world, the sin in our lives, and he flips them on its head and he redeems us. So sit with that today and ask yourself this question and really ponder it. Do I live in a way that shows God's redemption in my life? Because the act of what Jesus did for us on the cross, as well as beating death and resurrecting, something that we get to celebrate here in a couple of days, that's not something small. In fact, it's a pretty big deal. It's supposed to be a life changing deal. And so let's live like it. Let's live in a way that reflects that God changed our lives, that he redeemed us, that he saved us, and that we are people who act like it. So let us embrace the hope that springs forth from the ashes of despair, knowing that through Christ, a new life is always possible. I'm going to say that again, knowing that through Christ, a new life is always possible. If you are struggling to feel close to God, maybe you're struggling with a certain sin, anything like that that's going on, take comfort in this. A new life is always possible. You can always start living in a way that shows that God has redeemed you. You just need to embrace that and to give it to God. Because there is nothing that you can do that God isn't going to love you. The very depth of his love was shown on the cross today. So don't ever think that you are beyond redemption, that God couldn't love you, that getting past whatever your sin and your struggle is impossible, because it isn't. And we see that on what Jesus did for us on the cross. So, happy Good Friday. And I look forward to celebrating with the rest of you this Easter Sunday, the resurrection of Christ, and what it means for us, and ultimately how we can go out and live like a redeemed people. Guys, thank you so much for joining me on this Good Friday. I'm Wes Lowry. This has been Righteous Rhetoric, and we'll see y'all next time. Thank you.